We're here in Baltimore today visiting a local brewery that's brewing up more than just beer. It's brewing up history. Let's go. That's like an expert pour right there. Thank you for talking with us today. Could you introduce yourself and just tell us who basically you are?
My name is Steve Demczuk. I am the founder of Baltimore Washington Beer Works and one of the original founders of Peabody Heights Brewery. And we make the Raven series of beers, the Edgar Allan Poe series of beers, I should say.
And with that, what's the history of the Raven beer?
I started the brewery, or the beer I should say, in Germany. I made the first Beer of the Month club called Beer Around the World out of Luxembourg. And the person who supplied me with beer, Wolfgang Stark, one day asked me if I wanted to brew a beer with an American theme in Germany.
Okay.
And I'd already tried to build a brewery in Belgium, which unfortunately failed. So when he made that offer to me, I immediately jumped at it. Wolfgang was one of the suppliers of our beers, where he brought in beer from New Zealand, Africa, and places like that, and we served it in our beer club.
Now, why beer?
Went to Europe to do a postdoc in molecular biology and just fell in love with the different beers, the different styles, and the beer culture, different from England, Belgium, Germany, let's say.
And what makes it different?
The different cultures? That's a good question. I would think probably the climate and the type of people and what was available at the time, hops and yeast and what have you, and ale yeast versus lager yeast and things like that. And it's just a culture that grew up, they all grew independently from each other. Okay. I imagine laws each individual country dictated also how the different styles developed.
Okay.
Like the Reinheitsgebot in Germany, just 4 ingredients: yeast, water, hops, and malt, and that's it.
Huh.
And that was since 1512, 13, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, for you, why did you choose Edgar Allan Poe? Why did you choose the Raven? Well,
when my future partner, Wolfgang, suggested we do an American theme because young Germans travel around the world. When they come back to Germany, they were asking for something different than the Reinheitsgebot type beers, yeast, hops, malt, and water. And he saw that. And this is back in the 90s, early 90s. And so he offered to try to do something with an American theme. And I'm from Baltimore, and the first thing that popped in my head was Edgar Allan Poe. And I've always been a Poe fan, and immediately was the Raven. And he said, fantastic, because everyone in Europe knows Edgar Allan Poe, so he thought that was a good idea.
It's amazing that somebody that is so popular in just a small city, not that Baltimore's that small, but this small city, it's really Poe is a theme here, has such worldwide reach.
Well, I mean, you got to also consider that Poe, there's 4 other cities in America that claim Poe as their own, because he was born in Boston, raised in Richmond, and traveled extensively between Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York, and lived in all 3 of those places too. So.
Now, you have more than one. The Raven is not the only Edgar Allan Poe themed beer. You have more than one. What made you decide to choose to theme each beer around a story or a poem?
No particular reason, except for the fact that the stories are very interesting. And if you look at each story and you maybe look at the labels themselves, we have symbols of the stories on the right and left of Poe, here in this case pendulums, for Pit and the Pendulum. So every story you can do so much with it. And with the cask, the bottle you have over here, you've got brick and mortar and chains, where he ties the person, shackles the person against the wall, and bricks them in behind the wall with mortar and bricks. So you can do a lot with Poe.
And does the stories dictate how you approach the brewing of the beer, the making of it, or do you make it and then go, well, how does this inspire me? What?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, you would think the Raven would be a dark beer,
Yeah.
but it's a rich golden color beer. The double bock, the cask, probably. Maybe it has the hue of a sherry, because an Amontillado is a sherry.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could be similar to that. Annabelle Lee, that would be appropriate to be a Belgian wit beer. You know, being very feminine, the woman at the sea blowing the dress and things like that. Maybe, perhaps that's indicative of a nice effervescent, light Belgian wit beer.
Okay. And you mentioned this before a little bit, but each of these bottles has its own unique label for each brew. Could you talk a little bit about the labels and why the direction you went with them?
Yeah, we have a center character. First of all, Kevin Gallagher, the political cartoonist for the Baltimore Sun and The Economist magazine. He does all of our artwork. And Glenn Dellin is the graphic person who puts this all together. Okay. And they're a team, and they joined us, and this is why I think why the labels themselves look so nice. But it's a very basic thing. Cal wanted to focus on Poe itself, and that'd be the central focal point of the bottle of the beer. And he emphasized a very large head, and people focus on the face of Poe. And every label, Poe holds the glass that fits the style of the beer. So here I have a Pilsner glass, and with the cask, a double bock, you have a goblet, you know, for drinking very small amounts of sipping the beer, let's say, and versus a beer like this. On the right and left of Poe are symbols of the story.
Okay.
And the other interesting thing is just basically the logo and the name. And the reason for that, we had more information below here, but I was at a bar once and I could not read my own label because Pendulum Pilsner, and it was a Pilsner, was so small I couldn't read it. So we removed the other stuff and we focused just on the brand name and the logo. That's it in the front. On the side, we always have a tagline, a cut above the rest, being Pendulum Pilsner. It never skips a beat is Telltale Heart. And we use our general slogan, the taste is poetic, on the lager, for example. On the back of the label, we have a line or two from a particular story. And the bottle caps, we have Poe holding the proper glass that fits the particular brand that the cap is on. So we put a lot of emphasis on
Poe. It's very classy. I being an artist, I like have an odd fascination with beer labels and beer bottles and the design of them. And I find personally a lot of them are very busy. But these are nice, draws your eye right in.
It was done on purpose. And the bright colors too. If you notice, we have the bright red for Telltale, the green, the purple, the yellow or orange for Annabelle Lee.
I've noticed about that some craft beers pull their inspiration from history or historical events. Do you feel like doing that helps to expose people who might not have necessarily known about that history, or in this case, everybody knows Edgar Allan Poe, but they just might know him as that guy who writes the creepy tales. If somebody is holding, having the cask, and then reads the thing and says, oh, the cask of Amontillado, and reads the quote, do you notice that people might be more apt to go and search that out and read it?
Yeah, I think I have over the years and inspired, if that's the right word, for people to go out and read a Poe because they say, oh, I never read any of his stories. And they sound very interesting and they'll go about looking at it. Yeah, I think that happens in a number of craft brewers. Yeah,
and I can't remember the name of it now, but there was another one that focused on all these events that happened on the Great Lakes. And they were like, I never knew about that, so I went and looked it up.
Sure.
And
There was a brewery early 2000s that did a series on Civil War generals. And they had, I think they had 12 brands, and each 6 Confederate, 6 Union.
wow.
And if you didn't know who Stewart was or someone like that, you would probably go look it up.
It's, you know, it's kind of funny to think that a beer or alcohol or being in a bar would spark an idea to go, hey, I got to go figure out that history. But here it is.
Mendocino Brewery in California has a series of birds. And so you may want to go, oh, what's this bird? And go on Wikipedia. Sitting at a bar, you got nothing else to do. You pull out your smartphone and start studying about the particular bird. Or reading Poe, perhaps.
Or reading Poe. Sipping on your Pendulum Pilsner while reading about a person in the pit. Now, you sometimes host Poe Themed Events here. Why? Other than just, you know, you have a Poe themed beer, why doing a whole event around Poet?
Well, I kind of like to support literature and the fine arts in general. I am also a board member of the Poe House in Baltimore.
Okay.
So the last event we did was a fundraiser for Poe Baltimore. And
was that the Poe?
Poe Pints and Poetry,
yes.
right.
It was a very, very, very nice event.
Thank you. So we do things like that, and Baltimore Literature, Baltimore Lipmore, I guess it's called, and a few other things. I'll be doing one in the Baltimore Book Festival in Inner Harbor.
Okay.
And I think that's September. I'll be down there supplying beer for that too.
Oh, wow. Now, you're a board member for the Poe House?
Yep.
What is
Poe
the
Baltimore.
Poe? What is Poe Baltimore?
Poe Baltimore is now an independent organization, nonprofit, that was given the rights to maintain, run the Poe House in Baltimore from the city. The city owns the house, but it gave Poe Baltimore the right to maintain it, run it as a museum, whatever.
Now, I've actually been over that way. That was at one time in danger, wasn't it, of being torn down?
Yeah, I think it was actually in danger of being torn down.
And does the Poe Baltimore, does it do anything else in Baltimore for Poe?
Well, the idea is to spread the word of Poe, besides the Poe House and maintaining the Poe House, but also one of the purposes of Poe Baltimore is to spread the word of Baltimore in the name of Poe, you know, as an attraction to Baltimore. Come to Baltimore not just for the crabs in Inner Harbor or whatever, but swing by the Poe's grave, Westminster Church, and the Poe House.
And
we will be eventually setting up a Poe tour.
Really?
Yeah, a fixed Poe tour, various sites around Baltimore that are related to Poe.
And I mean, a lot of people know Poe, but why should people know Poe? Why should we remember his life and his history?
Oh, he's one of America's greatest authors. He is founder of several genres in literature, the modern mystery story, the modern horror story, things like that are credited to him as the originator of these particular genres. And he was a character. If anything, he represents Baltimore, or Baltimore represents him. You know, they're hand in hand.
It's I think, at least in my life, Poe was one of the first authors that I recognized as an author. Like, I knew there were books, and you read books in class, but as an author, as an individual, and not their books. I think it was Poe as the first person, and it's approachable.
Yeah, and the literature that he wrote, the stories, the poems, whatever, the essays, fit him, his personality, so much. So he was a tormented person, and so were the stories that he wrote about.
Guess you could say he was like that, the atypical tortured artist.
Yeah, right.
Now, Poe is famous for not only his writing, but liking to imbibe alcohol. Do you ever think it's funny honoring somebody who drinks or was famous for drinking with a beer that's fitting almost?
Yeah, I would think so. I can't see why not. I mean, it's not making fun of him or anything like that, but H.L. Mencken drank beer. There are people wrote about him and his beer escapades. And there are other famous authors who were indulged in alcohol or drugs or something like that. Hemingway, and we can go on and on. F. Scott Fitzgerald.
As soon as you said that, Hemingway was the first person that came to my head.
So yeah, I think it's appropriate, and like I said, it's not negative at all. And
No.
Actually, I think it's quite nice connection between the two.
Yeah, it's
And the
almost
brand.
fitting.
Yeah.
Now, what is the future? You have 5 flavors now.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Are you coming out with any more?
Hopefully in October we'll come out with the Dark Usher. I'm sorry, I had a brain freeze for a second.
It's okay.
Coming out with Dark Usher. Dark Usher will be a Kolsch, but I can't tell you exactly specifically about it. It's a surprise.
Which is the Dark Usher, I'm assuming, is the Fall
of the House of Usher. Correct.
Which now you're starting to get into less of the right on the tip of the tongue.
Mm-hmm. There's more you can definitely do that are more well-known than maybe the Fall of the House of Usher. But
I know I like that because it's the idea of starting to pull in ones that people might not instantly recognize, and then they will go and say, now I have to read this.
Good point. Thought about doing the Gold Bug or something like that also.
Very nice, very nice. And now, other than just the future of flavors, what's the future for Raven Beer?
Good question. Looking to do more seasonal beers.
Okay.
We don't do seasonal beers. Craft industry, large percentage of the beer sold are seasonals.
Okay.
I think I've heard 35% of the beer sold in the craft beer industry are seasonals. You're talking about, winter beer, Christmas beer, some kind of spring beer, summer beers. You've got the Oktoberfest, you've got pumpkin beers. I mean, every other month there's a new season for specialty beers, seasonal beers. So they're big, and we don't do any at the moment. Try to focus on the few that we have and expand the Poe line, the Poe series, and then followed by some seasonals here and there.
That would be interesting to start to add a limited edition aspect to it.
Right.
Anything else going on with Raven?
Got opportunities to build a brew pub, so we're looking at that.
Very nice.
A couple of locations, but that's still up in the air right now.
Okay. All right. Could you talk about how I should say, how beer is made?
Well, beer is a process. It's you cook beer.
Okay.
You age beer, you ferment beer, and all that. So essentially, you need a source of sugar, where the yeast convert the sugar into carbon dioxide and alcohol.
Okay.
And most of your source of sugar is malted barley. It can be wheat, could be malted wheat or unmalted wheat, but it's a source of sugar through starch.
Okay.
And the mashing process, where you add the water at different temperatures, activates certain enzymes, amylases, the alpha beta amylases, which breaks the starch, which is like a very complex sugar, like a branch structure, like a tree, and chops it down into smaller 1, 2, 3 carbon sugar molecules, which the yeast can then absorb through the cell wall membrane and break it down into carbon dioxide and alcohol. During that, so you got the mashing process, you have different temperatures where you can turn on, turn off the alpha and beta amylases. You can have complex sugars will give you more malty feel to the mouth. You can have simple sugars where it's totally fermented, so it's a drier beer like a Pilsner versus a not drier beer like a cask. And that much of that is due to the way you mash the beer, turning on those enzymes. That has a nice mouth, full body feel, sweetness to it, malty. This is drier and more crisp type of feel to the beer. And then you throw in different malts. We put in a dark malt to give that color. We don't put in any dark malt to keep that light. And then you boil the beer, and during the boiling process, you throw in your hops. You can throw in the hops at different periods of time. We boil typically 90 minutes here.
Okay.
And you can throw the hops in at the beginning of the boil, and that at the beginning of the boil creates an isomerization of the hop oils, which gives the beer a more bitter taste.
Okay.
If you put the hops in at the end of the boil, the last 15, 10, 5 minutes, it more is gives the beer more aroma, hop aroma versus bitterness to the taste. So you can play with different hops, different times in the boil. Then you cool down the wort, you oxygenate it, then you pitch in your yeast. And again, there's many different kinds of yeast. You got ale yeast for ales, you got lager yeast for pilsners and lagers, and you got Belgian wheat yeast for Belgian beers and things like that. And there's variations in there. So now you pitch the yeast and all that, and it's bubbling away, it's fermenting, it's eating up all the sugar inside, it's creating alcohol and CO2. And in the case of our Telltale Heart IPA, we throw in hops. It's called dry hopping. We have a machine that we throw in the hops, you pressurize it, hook it up to the pipe of the fermenter, and we blow in the hops into the machine, into the fermenting vessel. And we do that after it ferments and let those hops sit in the beer for 5 days.
Okay.
Then we rack that off, we filter it, 2 steps of filtration, and then we carbonate the beer at a particular level that we want, particular mouthfeel that we were looking for, and then we keg it and bottle it after that.
Now, with this process, granted you have machines in there that do mixing and all that, but has the process changed a lot during the history of beer making, absent the addition of the new machines that make things easier?
Process pretty much the same, although there were times when they used other sources of sugar, maybe just raw sugar, maybe anything. Could be bread. In the old days, they throw in bread and water and watch the natural yeast bacteria come out of the sky, and all of a sudden they have an alcoholic beverage. That's how basically beer was invented, or discovered, I should say. And then they fine-tuned that process over time. One of the additions was the discovery of lager yeast versus ale yeast. Another great change in the beer industry was refrigeration. Before you could not temperature control the beer, and they had to use caves and things like that. If you live in a flat country like Belgium, you don't have caves, so refrigeration is very important. Actually, they do probably have caves in the Ardennes regions, but for the most part, the country is pretty flat. Germany has more caves than that, but and then Pasteur came around saying, there's bugs in here that could really make the beer bad. And then we realized sanitation was important, so that became a very critical step in the beer making process. And then there was the packaging, the discovery of cans and bottles and refrigerations, and that allows you to ship it from Baltimore to California if you wanted to. And that altered the industry tremendously, but that's of course not the brewing process, that's something else. But the industry has, there's always been and always will be modifications, fine tuning, but the process itself is pretty much the same for since 1200, 1300 probably.
Wow. Now, when you go and decide I'm going to make a new Poe themed beer, how long does the process take for you to decide upon, from start to finish, of this is what the beer is going to be?
Taking into account the story and all?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always thinking, I got a notepad and I always write down notes. And I have a feeling, you got to understand, the craft beer industry is driven by variation and changes. It's not, when my dad drank beer, he had 1 or 2 brands and that's all he drank. I do a lot of beer tastings at liquor stores, and I go there and I watch people when they go to the cold box or the shelf, and I watch them, and they just sit there and they study. They go up and down the shelves. Do I feel like a porter today? Do I feel like a IPA or a lager or whatever? A pale ale. No, okay, let's do pale ale. Oh, which one is it now? And is it by I don't know how they pick them. Is it by the color? Is it by the the logo that's on the bottle or on the box. I don't know what makes them decide this one versus that one. But a large number of craft beer drinkers change all the time, and they expect you to change. And when I first started this business, I had Raven Lager. I figured, well, Heineken did it, Guinness has done it. 99% of their sales is one brand.
Right.
Why can't Raven be the brand? Why can't it be the next Natty Boh of Baltimore? Well, it didn't turn out that way. And that's because the craft beer drinker is spoiled to some extent. That they have so many choices that their taste buds change seasonally, weekly, whatever it may be. So you got to come out and with a new brand once in a while. But I take it. I think about it a lot. We don't have the revenue to just blast a whole bunch of brands out,
right,
and all that. I take it very seriously, and I study the label, study the story, I study the style, and I think what is out there that's missing. Where can I slide my beer in? And I think that's why I'm doing a Kolsch, because Brewers Alley, Monocacy Brewing up in Frederick, that's their #1 selling beer, and it's a very good Kolsch they make. So I think they hit on a real nice little niche in the market there.
A lot of breweries have merchandise for their beers. This is kind of a standard nowadays.
Right.
Why did you choose to focus more on the Poe aspect of it with a lot of your merchandise over the beer aspect of it?
I don't think I have an answer for that. I think that's just the way it was. But I have submitted artist drawings of our beer labels to our T-shirt maker.
Okay.
And they're a little behind. I expected to have them by now, but every label we have will have its own T-shirt.
Okay.
So we did that in the past on one, but I just don't have an answer why I chose to focus on Poe versus the label, the beer, or the brewery itself. No particular reason. Okay. I think Poe's interesting, It's an interesting face, and we got these cool glasses or bottles that he holds, and I think that probably is the reason. Oh, well, I can tell you one thing. I was on a computer when we were designing these labels, and Cal sent me the first four. It was the Raven, it was the Pendulum, the Cask, and the Telltale Heart IPA. Okay. And by chance, I happened to be on the internet, and I was Googling the Beatles and did images, and out popped John, Paul, George, and Ringo, the Fab Four.
Yeah.
It was the Let It Be album, and had 1, 2, 3, 4 right there. And I said, I got 4 labels. There's 4 Beatles. So we called the T-shirt the Fab Four. So I put the 4 Poes, each holding a unique glass on that. Or Cal designed it, and we did that.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So we just I guess we just continued with that theme.
That theme.
Right.
Do you have any interesting stories about this building or how you came to be in this location? Yeah.
Myself and Hollis Albert were working on trying to open up the Hauser's building in Hollandtown on Eastern Avenue. And we wanted to make that into a brew pub and a brewery. It's a 30,000 square foot building, 3 levels. And we were in there for about 2 months, working on it, cleaning it, looking behind the walls, the ceilings, up on the roof. And after about a month or a month and a half, we realized it was it would be a daunting task to get that up and running. It would be very expensive. And then, so Hollis was out, let's see if we can find something else. And he didn't grow up around here, but apparently his dad had an apartment building, and he used to climb on the top of it, according to his story. And he used to look down here and see this building from a distance. And one day he decided to drive around here because he remembered this, and there was a for sale sign on the door. And he contacted the owner, and we took over. But it was a beverage capital soda bottling plant before.
Okay.
And they did Shasta, Canada Dry, RC Cola, things like that here.
So there wasn't a whole lot of other than bringing in the actual machines that do the brewing, there wasn't a whole lot of adaptation you had to do because it was already a bottling place?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. It helped us considerably because the drains were here. We'd have to put in drains, a lot of utilities, the proper size water intake and outflow and all that was there. There's a, what do you call it, a place for water effluents to collect, things like that. There was a cold room. We actually built another cold room. Now we had to do, we did all the new electricity here and all that. There was a lot to be done because it was old and outdated.
Well, was it vacant for a while before you came
vacant.
in?
I think it was vacant. I wouldn't call it totally vacant. It had cars, and when I came in, I counted 85 cars parked here because the guy who owned it has a car repair shop around the corner.
Oh, okay.
And that's where he parked the cars.
Okay.
So between the cars and the grease, there was a lot of stuff here too, besides just a vacant building.
Interesting. With the Poe series, where do you distribute and how much do you put out?
Good question. We distribute currently in Maryland, Washington, D.C., parts of Virginia, parts of Pennsylvania, Delaware, and California.
Okay.
Don't have the real numbers right now on the top of my head how much we put out, but I expect to probably do about 7,000 barrels this year, maybe 8,000, hopefully. I think the fall, it will be the deciding factor because that's our peak season.
Okay.
And Telltale is our #1 seller. It overtook Raven last year.
Okay.
And seems to be growing very fast too.
And do you have, I would say obviously you want to try to get it as many places as possible, but
Sure.
is there any places on the prospects in the future that you might be going to?
Our attorney has the contract with a new distributor in Philadelphia and 8 surrounding counties. That should be opening, I hope, by the end of August. We're looking into filling the rest of Virginia.
Okay.
Haven't chose a distributor yet. Got a few in mind. Looking to expand to the central part of Pennsylvania, 10 more counties, perhaps. Been talking to a distributor there for a year and a half now. Going north, it would probably be New Jersey and Manhattan.
Okay.
I have a number of retail outlets and restaurants in Manhattan have been asking for our beer, so I got a list of those.
Okay.
So and also there's exporting to Europe.
Really?
Yes, that's we brew in Europe now. We got 3 brands over there.
Wow. Okay.
Or actually 4 when I count a Christmas beer. And my partners over there want to have us export, starting with the Raven and Telltale Heart over there.
Excellent.
So we're redesigning labels and things like that at the moment.
So you'll be bringing a little Baltimore beer to the rest of the world.
Right. Hopefully.